The fluorescent lights hum in the stale, humid air of the Department of Motor Vehicles. Outside, the Virginia heat presses against the smudged windows, its presence a constant, unyielding weight. Inside, the air conditioning sputters in half-hearted defiance. A line of weary faces waits beneath laminated signs and flickering overhead bulbs. She sits near the end, back straight despite the discomfort in her lower spine, hands folded in her lap to conceal the tremor she pretends not to notice. She wears a pale blue blouse with pearl buttons, carefully ironed. It was chosen not for comfort, but for presentation. Her son insisted it looked more appropriate. She had wanted to wear something lighter, something that didn't feel like armor. But he had been right, hadn't he? People take you more seriously when you appear composed, not desperate. Tyler, her son, stands beside her, tall and rigid in his posture. His eyes rarely leave his phone, except to glance toward the front of the line every few minutes. His presence is steady but distant, and she feels the space between them more acutely than ever. They have not spoken since leaving the house. Her number is called. She rises slowly, the ache in her right hip responding with its usual protest. Tyler moves first, reaching the counter before she does. She follows, expecting to speak, to explain that she's here for a renewal. She rehearsed it in her head on the drive over: name, address, reason for visit. But before she utters a word, Tyler speaks. He tells the clerk she can't drive anymore. The sentence hangs in the air. It's not loud, but it's definitive. A declaration issued in a voice devoid of hesitation. She blinks, as if trying to clear a film from her eyes. The clerk glances at her, then back to him, awaiting clarification. The heat rises behind her ears. A flush spreads across her chest. She tries to speak, but the words scatter in her throat. She manages only a confused whisper, unable to summon the volume to object. The clerk begins asking questions: medical evaluations, documentation, consent. But the room has gone dull and slow. The sounds blur. Her body is present, but her thoughts spiral. Her son is betraying her in public, not with malice, but with something more terrifying: conviction. He believes he is right. He believes he is protecting her. She is asked to sit. The form is slid across the counter. Surrender of license, voluntary. The pen shakes in her hand. This was not the plan. They were supposed to renew. That is what she had prepared for. She had even studied the new traffic laws online the night before, just in case. She wanted to be ready. She needed to prove she could still do this. Tyler takes the pen from her fingers, gently, like he's helping a child. She doesn't resist, though she should. Her silence feels like permission, but she cannot summon the resistance to stop him. Her body is stiff, her breath shallow. Her mind is a kaleidoscope of memory fragments, faces, voices, warnings she never wanted to hear. Later, she sits in the DMV waiting area again, watching a teenager take a photo for his learner's permit. He's grinning, shoulders back, freedom stretched out in front of him. The contrast cuts deep. She has lost something. Not just a license, but something intangible. Something that has been eroding slowly, silently for years. The drive home is quiet. Tyler does not speak. He adjusts the rearview mirror twice. His fingers grip the wheel tightly, like he is trying to keep control of more than just the car. She looks out the window, seeing nothing. Her reflection in the glass looks older than she remembers, thinner, diminished. When they reach the house, she doesn't get out immediately. She sits in the car, staring at the dashboard. Her eyes linger on the odometer. She remembers the day Gregory bought the car. He had insisted on choosing it for her, said it was safer, more practical. She hadn't argued. She never did, not really. Inside the house, the silence expands. It fills the corners, wraps around the furniture, clings to the walls. She moves through the kitchen like a visitor. Every cupboard contains reminders of routines she no longer controls. A grocery list written in someone else's handwriting. Expiration dates she can't remember checking. She finds herself unsure of when she last cooked something from memory. Her purse sits on the counter, open. Her keys are inside. She pulls them out, holds them in her palm. They feel heavier than they used to. Cold, useless. Symbols now, nothing more. In the hallway mirror, her face is pale. The woman staring back at her is unfamiliar. Her own eyes betray a question she cannot answer. When did I stop being trusted? Later in bed, sleep does not come. The fan above creaks with every rotation. Shadows stretch across the ceiling like fractures. She stares at the space beside her, empty now for 2 years. Gregory's side of the bed remains untouched. She never moved his pillow. His voice, though silent, echoes. "You overthink everything, Deborah. Let me handle it." She had let him, for decades. Finances, decisions, even parenting. Tyler had grown up watching his father manage everything. Lila had rebelled early and paid the price. Estranged now, her voice only ever reaching through brittle text messages. The last one had simply read, "I hope you find yourself eventually." The words had stung. Now they feel prophetic. She closes her eyes and sees the DMV clerk again. The faint pity in her expression. The quiet efficiency of the process. The form that changed everything. Signed not with consent, but in submission. The morning had started with purpose. She had believed today would be a small triumph, a renewal of independence. Instead, it became a quiet erasure. She wonders if this is how it happens, not in catastrophe, but in subtle moments where silence is mistaken for agreement. The license is gone. The keys are meaningless. And yet, beneath the shock, something begins to stir. It is not rage, not yet. It is the smallest spark of realization. This is not about driving. This is about who gets to decide when she is no longer enough. Light filters through closed blinds and slatted lines across the carpet. Dust hangs in the stillness, unmoved by fan or breeze. She sits at the edge of the couch, a stack of folders and legal envelopes balanced on her lap. The room is quiet, save for the slow creak of the ceiling fan, an old metronome keeping time with her memories. The box she pulled from Gregory's closet is older than she expected, worn at the corners, filled with neatly labeled folders and brittle, faded receipts. She was looking for their insurance records, but instead, she finds a sealed envelope resting on top of a manila folder. The handwriting on the front is unmistakably Gregory's, sharp, deliberate, almost mechanical. It reads, "For Tyler. Read when she's gone." Her breath halts. A cold weight settles in her chest. She doesn't open it. Not yet. The wallpaper was floral, peeling slightly at the edges near the window. Gregory's side of the closet was twice the size of hers. He called it practical division. He had always spoken in absolutes: practical, efficient, reasonable. Everything in life could be optimized, managed, and executed with the right system, especially his family. He never raised a hand, not once. That's what made it more confusing. There were no bruises to trace, no visible scars to point to, but her thoughts were not her own. Her choices were subject to veto. She remembers once buying a cobalt blue vase at a craft fair without telling him. When he saw it, his smile was tight. "You didn't think to check the budget?" he asked. She had smiled, apologized, returned it the next day. She told herself it didn't matter. It was just a vase. But there was always something, little corrections, adjusted tones, reminders about what made sense. Over time, those moments piled up like sediment. The erosion was slow, but total. She sits at the table, a checkbook open in front of her. Gregory stands behind her, coffee in hand. "Just let me handle it, Deborah," he says, not unkindly. "It's easier that way." She nods, relieved more than disappointed. She wasn't taught to argue. Her mother used to say, "A man needs to feel in charge, even when he's not." Deborah believed it was love, making things easier, not harder, letting someone else take the burden. She realizes now it was something else, something that tightened around her more each year. Among Gregory's files, she finds a porcelain horse, its front leg cracked, glued back in place. She had forgotten about it. It had once sat on the mantel. Lila accidentally knocked it over during a game of hide and seek. Gregory didn't yell. He simply placed it back with an almost reverent care, then told Lila not to run indoors again. But later that night, Deborah found him standing in the living room alone, holding the broken leg. "She should learn consequences early," he said. The words hadn't seemed cruel then, just strict, reasonable. Now, holding the horse in her hands, she sees it for what it was. Control, packaged in politeness, discipline as domination. Charlene, the neighbor from 2 doors down, sits on the porch swing sipping iced tea. She watches Deborah approach with guarded concern. "You okay, hun?" Charlene asks. Deborah had smiled, her arms folded across her chest. Just tired. Charlene nodded, said nothing. But her eyes lingered too long. She knew. Deborah had said those words 100 times over the years. Just tired. It was a placeholder, a shield. A lie she told herself so many times she began to believe it. Exhaustion was easier to admit than sorrow or fear. She never told Charlene the full truth. Not about the way Gregory monitored every purchase, or how he changed the online banking passwords and never shared them again. Not about the way he framed her forgetfulness as fragility, or how he made financial dependence feel like romantic protection. She sits at Gregory's desk, hands resting on the worn wood. She pulls open drawer after drawer, each one filled with order. Folders alphabetized, notes in tidy columns, even an old voice recorder labeled Personal Reflections. She leaves that for later. The envelope marked for Tyler lies in front of her. It feels heavy, ominous. She still doesn't open it. Instead, she opens another drawer, the one he kept locked. Inside, their will, untouched since 2008, and a packet of investment statements she's never seen before. They're not addressed to her. They list Tyler as secondary trustee. Her name appears only once on a form labeled Medical Power of Attorney, Revoked. Her stomach drops. He had reassigned it, quietly, completely. She was never told. The dependency had not been incidental. It was intentional, constructed. A younger version of herself stands at the mirror, dabbing foundation under her eyes. She practices a smile. Behind her, Gregory's voice calls from down the hall. "Don't take too long. Dinner's at 6. She replies with a chirped, "Coming!" Her voice bright. Compliant. The smile in the mirror fades the moment he's out of earshot. She remembers that look. It haunted her for years. She stares at the letter again. Tyler's name. Gregory's writing. The future planned without her. A quiet fury builds. Not loud, not violent, but steady. Steady enough to open the envelope. She tears it cleanly, lifts the flap. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no warmth. Tyler, follow the trust document as outlined. Do not let her interfere. She won't understand what's best. Be firm, use your judgment. She'll resist, but she always bends eventually. Her breath catches. She reads it again. It isn't a letter. It's an instruction manual. A blueprint for how to manage her. Gregory's voice, even in death, echoing the same script. Her hands tremble, not from age or memory loss, but from the realization that her autonomy had been treated as a variable to eliminate, not a value to protect. The bruises never showed, but they were there. And now, finally, she sees them for what they were. The kettle whistles faintly on the stove, but she doesn't move to take it off. Steam coils upward in slow spirals. Her hand rests on the edge of the counter, fingers curled slightly. She watches the window, though there's little to see. The yard beyond is still, shaded in the blue haze of dusk. Tyler's voice echoes from earlier in the day. Controlled, measured, certain. We're doing what's best. That phrase, so calm on the surface, pulses with the same rhythm she once heard from Gregory. Different voice, same cadence, same justification. Every decision framed as protection, every boundary redrawn under the guise of logic. She sees Tyler now as a reflection, not of herself, but of his father. I int. Tyler's office. Memory, 2 years ago. Clean lines, framed certificates, shelves filled with books about leadership and behavioral economics. Tyler sits behind a desk, perfectly still, fingers laced. She had come to discuss her taxes. Gregory had always handled them. Tyler offered to help. "You really should have someone manage this professionally," he'd said. "I thought you said you'd do it." "I meant I'd oversee it, for your sake." There had been no malice in his tone, only efficiency. She had nodded, thanked him, pretended to understand. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't the last. Into dining room, flashback. Holiday 5 years ago. The room is dressed for tradition. Candles flicker above an untouched roast. Crystal glasses glint under the chandelier. Tyler pours wine into his glass, nodding as Lila speaks, but his eyes say otherwise. Lila's voice rises, sharp, defensive. "You talk like him now, like everything is a calculation." Tyler leans back. "Because emotion doesn't solve anything." She slams her napkin down. The silver ring rolls off the table. "You sound just like him." Gregory, already seated at the head of the table, remains quiet, watching, Evaluating. Lila turns to their mother. And you? Why don't you ever say anything? Deborah opens her mouth but says nothing. Lila leaves. The door slams. The meal resumes. Quiet as ash. Int. Studio apartment. Memory. Lila's place. Years ago, paint stains the edge of a chipped table. Canvases lean against one another in a corner. Light spills in through uncurtained windows, wild and golden. Lila stands barefoot, cigarette smoldering in a dish beside her. I couldn't stay there, Mom. I felt like I was suffocating. Deborah had come to visit, unannounced. I wasn't the one keeping you away. Number. But you didn't stop him. Silence stretched between them. Lila reached for the cigarette, but didn't light it. You always let him make the rules. Deborah hadn't responded then, either. She had walked through the apartment that afternoon like a stranger, admiring Lila's work but not recognizing the girl who created it. Now those words ring louder than they did then. Stacks of holiday decorations line the shelves. She's searching for an old photo album, but stops at a dusty ornament box instead. Her fingers graze a handmade angel, its fabric yellowing with time. Lila made it when she was 8. The glue still holds. Barely. She thinks of how often Lila cried as a child, how often Gregory dismissed it as oversensitivity. Don't coddle her, he would say. She needs to toughen up. Tyler never cried. He mimicked control early, mirroring his father's quiet dismissals, his ability to separate feeling from function. She remembers a time Lila scraped her knee on the driveway. Gregory told her to get up. Tyler handed her a Band-Aid but didn't meet her eyes. The silence in the house is thicker now. Lila doesn't call. Tyler checks in, but only when necessary. He manages her bills now, her prescriptions, her schedule. Her hands are steady, but her voice has gone unused. Even her decisions are filtered through someone else's reasoning. Her own logic now feels like a relic. She remembers thinking, after Gregory's funeral, that maybe she'd feel free. But Tyler had stepped into the void with ease, not with cruelty, but with quiet direction, smoother even, less confrontational, but just as final. She begins to wonder when she last made a choice without seeking permission. She opens the bottom drawer of her nightstand. Inside is a letter from Lila, never mailed. Unfinished. Mom, I wish I could explain how small I felt in that house, how unseen. Folded beside it is a photograph. Lila at 10, face smeared with frosting, holding up a crooked birthday cake. Tyler stands behind her, expression blank. Gregory off to the side, only half in frame. She runs her finger along the image. Their faces tell the story more honestly than any diary ever could. She places the photo back, but the words linger. She begins to see that emotional absence is its own form of injury. She sees her complicity too. She had told herself she was keeping peace, avoiding conflict, maintaining order. But silence too leaves scars. Grandma, why are you always in the kitchen by yourself? Maisie asked the question with the innocence only a child could possess, seated cross-legged on a bar stool, her face streaked with chocolate pudding. I was rinsing out the blender when she said it, the late afternoon sun casting golden beams through the window. I paused, water running over my hands, and turned slowly. What do you mean, sweetheart? You're always in here, she said matter-of-factly, swinging her little legs. Everyone else is talking outside or playing, but you're always doing stuff in here. Her words settled into my chest like stones in a pond. No malice, no accusation, just observation, unfiltered, true. I guess I like it here, I replied softly, drying my hands. It's quiet. Maisie tilted her head. You can come outside if you want, I'll sit with you. I smiled, fighting the lump in my throat. Maybe I will. That evening, around the long dining table set for Caleb's birthday, Declan blurted something between mouthfuls of mashed potatoes. Mom, Margot, can I have more? Silence fell, like a dropped glass. Caleb looked up, startled. Ainsley's eyes narrowed, and a tiny flicker crossed her face, a micro-expression of restrained offense. Sweetie, she said to Declan, her tone saccharine but clipped. Margot's not your mom. She's your grandma, remember? Mommy is right here. Declan shrunk into his chair, cheeks flushing. I reached for the mashed potatoes and placed another scoop on his plate without a word. Kids mix things up, I said quietly. Ainsley sipped her wine. Sure, but let's not confuse the roles. The rest of the table conversation moved on, but the sting stayed with me. Later that night, I found myself lingering in the children's room, helping them choose pajamas. Maisie pulled me down onto the carpet with her picture book, nestling close as I read about bears and bedtime adventures. Declan watched us from his bed. "Do you ever get scared at night?" he asked. I looked up. "Sometimes. When I was little." "What did you do?" "I'd talk to someone, my sister, my dad, or I'd sing to myself." Declan nodded. "Sometimes I tell you things when I'm scared." I reached over and gently touched his hair. "I'm glad you do." Flash. The memory came without warning. A winter storm 2 years ago. Caleb and Ainsley stranded during a delayed flight. I'd stayed with the kids for 3 days. On the second night, Declan had woken up crying, and I'd found him curled into a ball, whispering something about shadows. "I don't like when she gets mad," he'd said. I didn't press him then, just held him until he fell asleep. I told myself children exaggerated, that it was just a bad dream. But now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, while making pancakes, Maisie came into the kitchen clutching a sheet of printer paper covered in crayon. "Want to see our family?" she beamed, handing it to me. I studied the drawing, 4 stick figures: Declan, Maisie, Caleb, and me. No Ainsley. I tried to keep my expression neutral. "This is lovely, sweetheart. You worked hard on it." "I made another one," she whispered. "But Mommy got mad, so I had to throw it away." I felt the air shift around me. "Why did she get mad?" "I drew you with wings. She said it was silly." That night, after the kids were asleep, I pulled out a lined journal from the back of my closet. It had been a gift from Arthur on my birthday, one of those leather-bound ones with gilded edges. I'd never written in it. It felt too pretty for grocery lists, too indulgent for nonsense. But now I needed somewhere to place the things I couldn't say aloud. I wrote slowly, the pen scratching across the paper like a confession. Today, Maisie asked why I'm always in the kitchen alone. Declan called me Mom. Ainsley corrected him like I was a stranger who'd overstayed her welcome. Maisie drew a family picture. Ainsley made her destroy it. The next entry came the following day. Then another, and another. Each page was a reclamation. My thoughts, unfiltered. My truth, unpolished. I began to keep the journal in my apron pocket, jotting things down while washing dishes or folding clothes. It was the first thing that felt entirely mine in years. One afternoon, after tidying up the guest room, I noticed something odd. An air vent near the dresser had a small blinking light inside it. It wasn't visible unless you were directly beneath it. I stepped closer, squinting. It wasn't a vent. It was a camera, small, black, tucked into the slats like a spy. My chest constricted. I moved through the house, methodically checking rooms. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen, all with similar tiny devices tucked behind decor or fixtures. Not mine, not Caleb's. I knew whose. I retrieved my old phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "Harlan." My voice trembled. "Yes, Margot? I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, is it legal to install surveillance equipment in someone else's home without their knowledge?" There was a pause. "That's a loaded question. Why?" I hesitated. "Because I think Ainsley's been recording me." Another pause. "I'm coming over." He arrived within the hour. I showed him the devices. His expression darkened. "She didn't put these here for safety, Margot. These aren't nanny cams. They're spy cams." We stood in silence, the weight of it all pressing down like a thunderstorm on my shoulders. "How long?" I asked. "There's no way to know without accessing the network. But this isn't random. Someone put effort into hiding these." That night, I sat with my journal in my lap staring at the blank page. She's been watching me, mocking me, reducing me to a caricature. And somehow, worst of all, I wasn't surprised. I remembered her laughter on the patio, the sharp glances exchanged with her friends, the sideways comments. I thought she was just cruel. But this was control. This was obsession. This was war. It took me 3 days to find the nerve. 3 days of rereading my journal entries, of staring at the tiny, blinking camera light nestled into the hallway baseboard, of listening to Declan talk in his sleep, and Maisie hum to herself while drawing new pictures she hid under her mattress. 3 days of deciding I was no longer going to pretend nothing was happening. I waited until the kids were outside with Joanne, chasing bubbles across the backyard. Ainsley had gone out for errands. It was just Caleb and me, standing in the kitchen we used to bake Christmas cookies in. "I need to talk to you," I said, voice steady. He looked up from his phone, brows knitting slightly. "What's up?" I gestured to the dining room. "Let's sit." He followed, moving slower than usual, like he already sensed the terrain shifting beneath him. I folded my hands in front of me and looked him in the eyes. "There are cameras in the house, Caleb. Hidden ones, not mine." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "In the air vents, behind picture frames. They're nanny cams, but not for the kids. They're pointed at me." He blinked. "You're sure?" "Yes." He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, that's a serious accusation. I didn't accuse, I stated a fact, and you know who put them there." He didn't respond. I continued. "She's been watching me, recording me, probably laughing about it with her friends. I overheard her at the barbecue. She's just here to babysit. This isn't speculation. This is happening." He let out a breath and nodded slowly, though not in agreement, more like stalling. "I think you're reading too much into it." I stiffened. "Into cameras hidden in my home? I'm not saying it's okay if it's true," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "But maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed. You've been more anxious lately." "Don't," I said, voice sharper than intended. "Don't turn this into some imagined hysteria. I'm not losing my mind, Caleb." He stood, then sat back down, tapping his fingers against his thigh. "You've been through a lot this year." He tried again. "Dad's anniversary just passed. Maybe—" "This has nothing to do with grief. This has everything to do with the way your wife treats me, the way you allow it." "I don't allow anything," he said, but he still wasn't looking at me. "You don't stop it either." He went quiet. I pressed on. "The kids come to me. They're afraid to be themselves around her. They whisper things. They notice. Maisie draws me into the family, not her." "Kids draw things all the time," he said, deflecting. "That doesn't mean anything's wrong." "They're telling me something with their silence," I said, "just like you are." "I think you need to talk to someone," he said finally, softly. "A therapist. It might help. Work through some of this stress." It landed like a slap. "You think I'm crazy?" "No, I think you're struggling. And maybe therapy would help give you some peace." "You mean help me stop being inconvenient?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No, Caleb. What's not fair is being treated like a piece of furniture in my own home, being laughed at, dismissed, filmed without consent. That's not fair." Silence expanded between us. Then I heard the front door open. Light footsteps. A pause. Ainsley stepped into the frame of the hallway. She looked between us and smiled lightly. "Everything okay?" Caleb's body language changed instantly. He shifted, lowered his eyes, tucked his shoulders inward like a boy caught between parents. "Yeah," he said, "just talking." "About what?" "Nothing important," he answered too quickly. I stood, refusing to shrink. "It's fine, we're done." She looked at me with a flicker of something unreadable, suspicion or satisfaction, then turned to Caleb. "Can you help me with the groceries?" He followed her without a backward glance. I stayed in the dining room, heart pounding, not from rage but from the slow devastation of watching my son, my only child, retreat behind the wall he didn't even know he'd built. That evening, I told Joanne. She stirred her tea at the porch table, eyes narrowed in concern. "Hidden cameras?" "Yes." "And you're sure?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She sighed and set her spoon down. "So what are you going to do?" "I tried talking to Caleb." She winced. "And?" "He thinks I need help." "Well," I turned sharply. "Don't. I'm just saying, Margot. Maybe this is getting blown out of proportion. Maybe she put them in for safety. Then why not tell me? Why hide them?" Joanne shrugged, uneasy. People are strange about boundaries these days. "She doesn't think I deserve any." Joanne looked at me. Her expression softened but stayed hesitant. "Listen, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I agree, but maybe let it go. For the kids. For your sanity. You keep pushing this, and they'll shut you out." "They already are." She reached for my hand. "You're walking a fine line here. Margot, don't make things harder than they need to be." That line settled in my chest like a stone. Don't make things harder. How many times had I swallowed that same phrase over the years? When my mother corrected the way I sat, when Arthur's mother gave me unsolicited advice, when Ainsley took over birthday planning without asking, when Caleb forgot my birthday and Ainsley said, "He's just overwhelmed." Every time I'd told myself the same thing, don't make things harder. But now, I was starting to wonder who it had actually made life easier for. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't want to remember the conversation, the way Caleb's eyes slid away from mine, how quickly he folded when she appeared. Instead, I went to the garden. I pruned the hydrangeas, pulled weeds from the brick path, and talked aloud into the humid night air. I told the flowers about Caleb's eyes when he was a baby, how he used to grip my fingers so tightly, it made me believe I was the center of his small world. How he used to say, "Don't go, Mommy," when I left for work. How I used to whisper, "I'll never leave you." How far that promise now felt from reality. The stars blinked faintly through the tree branches. Crickets sang like they had every summer before this one. The familiar smells of soil and jasmine offered the only comfort I could rely on. In the garden, no one watched. No one judged. No one asked me to be smaller, quieter, more manageable. Out there, I could just be. Maisie found me there the next morning. "Are you sad?" she asked. I wiped dirt from my gloves and looked at her. "A little," she nodded. "Do flowers help?" I smiled. "Sometimes." She sat down beside me, cross-legged in the dew-damp grass. For a while, we just watched bees dance across blossoms, and in that silence, I made a new promise. Not to Caleb, not to Joanne, not even to the children. To myself. I wasn't going to let them shrink me anymore. The second family barbecue of the summer looked like a painting. Vivid colors, wide smiles, kids darting barefoot across trimmed grass. The grill hissed and flared with the scent of hickory smoke and buttered corn. Mason jars sweated with lemonade and sweet tea. Paper lanterns swayed in the breeze overhead, casting gentle shadows across linen-covered tables. I stood near the garden gate, arranging cutlery, listening to the click of tongs and the hum of polite conversation. The sun warmed the back of my neck. From a distance, it looked like joy. Closer in, the tension pulsed under every word. Ainsley moved like a hostess born to the role, graceful, loud enough to command attention, perfectly dressed in a coral sundress with crisp pleats. She laughed too loudly, clinked her glass too often. Her voice carried. Caleb stood near the grill with Harlan, their conversation shallow and safe. Sports, weather, real estate. I watched Caleb nod too often, eyes drifting to Ainsley as if waiting for a signal. Maisie tugged at my skirt. "Can I help with the napkins?" I smiled. "Of course, baby. Just fold them like this." She sat cross-legged beside the table, folding blue paper into triangles, humming to herself. In that moment, surrounded by chatter and clatter, she was the only stillness I could touch. Harlan approached a moment later with a plate of grilled shrimp, eyes scanning the scene. "Good turnout," he murmured. I nodded, not looking up. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I lied. "Fine." He didn't press. From across the yard, Ainsley's voice rang out like a gunshot cloaked in silk. "Well, Margot's just here to babysit, right?" she said, gesturing toward me with a chuckle. "Best unpaid help in the state." A wave of polite laughter followed, light, unsure, edged with discomfort. I froze. My hand paused mid-reach toward the serving platter. The world around me didn't stop, but my place in it suddenly shrank. Someone said something about grandmas being the real MVPs, and another joked, "Does she do house calls?" The laughter rose again, but it didn't reach me. I turned my back to the group, pretending to adjust the napkins. My fingers trembled slightly. Caleb said nothing. He didn't look at me. He stayed by the grill, flipping burgers. Declan and Maisie didn't notice. They were too busy racing across the lawn, squealing over a butterfly that had landed on the fence. I stood there, letting the sun burn my shoulders, letting the shame bleed through my spine. Ainsley laughed again, louder this time, performing. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Harlan stepped beside me again, this time more deliberate. His voice was low. "You want to take a walk?" I hesitated, then nodded. We walked the perimeter of the yard, past the hydrangeas, the vegetable boxes Arthur and I had built years ago. I could smell the basil, the rosemary, his herbs. You shouldn't have to endure that, Harlan said. His tone was calm, but his words were loaded. It's nothing, I murmured. She just jokes like that. No, he said flatly. That wasn't a joke. That was a message. I swallowed. It's easier if I don't make a scene. She humiliated you, on purpose, in front of your family. I've survived worse, I said quietly. That doesn't mean you should keep surviving. We reached the side gate and paused. The laughter from the yard had drifted away. The sounds of meat sizzling and ice clinking in glasses carried on, oblivious to my unraveling. I need to get back, I said. Harlan didn't argue. He just reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a business card. If you ever decide enough is enough. I took the card. He'd scribbled a line on the back in blue ink. You have options, and I believe you. He didn't wait for a thank you, just nodded once and disappeared around the hedges. I returned to the table like nothing had happened. I finished setting the spoons. I picked up an empty pitcher and refilled it. I complimented someone's pasta salad. No one said a word about the joke. No one apologized. No one noticed my hands shaking as I poured lemonade. Ainsley breezed past me, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Thanks for topping off the tea, Margot. You really are the MVP. She patted my shoulder, then turned away. That night, after everyone had gone, I cleared dishes alone. Joanne had offered to help, but I waved her off. I needed quiet. I needed space. The kids were asleep. Caleb and Ainsley retreated to the guest room without a word. No acknowledgement, no apology, not even a glance. In the laundry room, I found one of Maisie's drawings on the counter. It was a scene from the backyard. Balloons, sun, smiling stick figures. There I was again, drawn slightly larger next to the kids. Caleb in the corner. Ainsley was missing. I placed it inside my journal. Then I climbed into bed and pulled out the drawer in the nightstand. Inside, nestled between a box of tissues and a half-used lotion bottle, was Arthur's old wristwatch. The one he wore to every court date, every funeral, every major moment. I held it in my palm, the leather strap warm from my hand. The house was silent. Outside, crickets played their song. A sprinkler hissed somewhere down the street. I lay on my side and clutched the watch to my chest, and I cried. Not the way I had in the laundry room, not a storm of grief. This time it was quieter, heavier, like mourning something still alive. I cried for my son, for who I'd raised him to be, and who he wasn't. I cried for my grandchildren, who didn't yet understand the weight of performance and control. And I cried for myself, for being polite when I should have been angry, for being accommodating when I should have been protective, for being quiet for far too long. I cried until my pillow dampened, until my body curled into itself, until sleep eventually came. It began with a whisper, not a roar. After the barbecue, after the sting of laughter and Caleb's vacant silence, I stood in the hallway and stared at the blinking light of a hidden camera tucked beneath the molding. I didn't touch it. I didn't scream. I simply stared. And then I walked to the kitchen, pulled out a yellow sticky note and wrote, "You are not a ghost." I placed it on the inside of the spice cabinet, behind the cinnamon. The next morning I wrote another. "Your story is not over." That one went beneath the bathroom mirror. Then another. "You don't need permission to fight." They began populating the house like breadcrumbs for a woman I had once been, and was slowly remembering. I called them my reminders, but they were more than that. They were rescue lines. Next came the journal. It was a leather-bound notebook Arthur had gifted me on our anniversary, back when he was still around and trying to convince me to write more than shopping lists. I opened it for the first time in years. The pages were blank. I filled the first with a confession. July 19th. She made a joke again. Called me the help, in front of my son, in front of everyone. I smiled like I always do, but I'm not smiling anymore. I didn't stop. I documented it all. Not just the recent humiliations, but the slow erosion that had come before. I printed out texts Ainsley had sent, ones that seemed innocent at first, until they stacked against each other like bricks in a wall. "No need to worry about snacks. I've got it covered. Just stay in the background and let us handle it. The kids are adjusting to boundaries, so maybe don't distract them too much." I recorded voice memos from the children, tiny snippets while we baked cookies or worked in the garden, moments when they said things too fragile for adults to notice. I don't like when Mommy gets mad. She says Grandma's too emotional. I feel better when we're with you. Each one left me breathless. Each one went into a folder labeled Witness. In the evenings, I pulled out old photographs. Caleb as a boy, Arthur in his lawyer's robes, my mother in stiff dresses beside a silent man. I traced the faces with my fingers, trying to understand the legacy I had carried forward and what parts I had the power to break. One photo stopped me cold. Arthur and I at his office party. I was in a navy dress, pearls around my neck, smiling at something just out of frame. He had one arm around me, but what caught my eye wasn't the pose. It was his eyes, fixed on me, focused, seeing. He always saw me. I could still hear his voice, calm and unwavering. She's too controlled, Margot. There's something cold there. I don't like the way she treats you. Just promise me, if it ever gets worse, you won't wait for someone else to step in. He said it after Caleb's engagement dinner. I hadn't listened. Now I would. It took 3 weeks to prepare the envelope. Journal entries, screenshots, annotated summaries of specific incidents with dates and locations, testimonies whispered in crayon and colored pencil from Maisie and Declan, photos of the hidden cameras. I even included a list of Post-it notes and where I'd placed them, each one proof of the mental fortress I was slowly building. Then I made the call. Harlan, can I come by? He didn't hesitate. Today? Yes. It was a warm afternoon when I walked into his office, small, wood-paneled, quiet. He poured me coffee without asking how I took it. He already knew. You sure you're ready? He asked, folding his hands across his desk. I nodded and handed over the envelope. He opened it, sifting through pages in silence. His eyes moved quickly but carefully, pausing at notes, at sketches, at printed text with annotations in my handwriting. When he was done, he closed the folder and leaned back. This is a lot, Margot. You've been thorough. I had to be, I said. No one believes you until you give them evidence, and even then, they call you bitter. He didn't argue. I don't want to destroy their marriage. I don't want a war, I continued. But the children, they're absorbing it. And I've absorbed enough for a lifetime. He nodded. Have you considered what might happen if we pursue custody? I have, I said, and I'm not afraid of losing them anymore. I'm afraid of what staying silent is teaching them. He took a deep breath. We can file for temporary guardianship. The grounds would be emotional neglect, instability, environmental coercion. But we'll need corroboration. They've already given it, I said. They just didn't know they were giving it. He pushed the folder gently aside. Are you ready to put your name on this? To be the one who says, this stops now? I didn't blink. I am. He nodded. Then let's begin. When I left, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps. I stood there for a moment, feeling the warmth against my skin, feeling the clarity settle in my bones. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't making it up. I wasn't hysterical or bitter or stuck in the past. I was awake. That night, I rewrote every Post-it. I made them bolder, larger. I added new ones. Protect them. Reclaim your name. You are not a spectator. I placed one on the front door, right where my hand would land as I turned the knob to leave. It read, You are the storm now. The car door shuts in the driveway. She watches through the lace curtain as Lila steps out, suitcase in hand, her face half shadowed beneath sunglasses. It's been years, but the walk is the same, confident, defiant, heavy with unspoken things. She opens the door before Lila can knock. They stand face to face in the threshold. The silence between them is thick, but not brittle. Hi, her daughter says, setting down the suitcase. Hi, she replies. Neither hugs. Inside, the house feels unfamiliar even to her now, like they've stepped onto a soundstage of a life neither of them fully occupied. Lila's eyes scan the room. Nothing has changed since Gregory died, and maybe that's part of the problem. They sit in the living room. A manila folder lies on the coffee table between them. You brought the files? Lila asks. She nods. And the recorder. For the next hour, they go through it all. The documents, the trust, the medical directive, the audio files. The silence is broken only by gasps, pauses, and the occasional sharp exhale from Lila as she absorbs the weight of her father's voice. Neither of them cries. There's no time. You were right, her mother says. About him, about everything. Lila doesn't gloat. She doesn't nod. She just looks her mother in the eyes and says, I knew. I just needed you to know it too. Later, they sit at the dining table under the too bright overhead light, surrounded by paper. Documents sorted in piles, financials, health, legal. Her laptop is open, spreadsheets visible, timelines forming. Lila taps a pen against the table. This isn't just control, it's obsession, she says. It always was. I just thought it was love. Lila glances up, sympathetic but firm. Love doesn't erase you. The front door opens without warning. Tyler steps in, eyes darting immediately to the table. What's this? He asks, voice flat. Lila's here, she says. I see that. He walks toward them, jaw tightening with each step. We're going through the estate, she continues, the real estate. You don't need to involve her. Lila rises from her seat. I was already involved. I just didn't have the paperwork to prove it. Tyler scoffs. This is between Mom and me. No, she says, standing now too. This has always been between all of us, whether you wanted it that way or not. He looks between them, face reddening. I did what Dad wanted. That's what this was. Keeping things from unraveling. That's exactly the problem, she says. The words land like a gavel. Tyler's mouth opens then shuts. For a moment he seems younger, lost. Dad was preparing us, he mutters. No, Lila interrupts. He was preparing you to replace him. Tyler's composure cracks. You don't know what it was like, watching him fall apart. He trusted me. You let him cut me out of my own life, their mother says. You signed your name to my future. Tyler freezes. Lila's head turns sharply. What? Lila says. He looks down, guilty, defensive. I added my name to the property deed. It made things easier. Easier for who? Lila snaps. For all of us. It's standard, legal, clean. Her mother steps forward. You signed it while I was grieving. You weren't managing anything. I was mourning. And you took advantage of that. Tyler's fists clench. You weren't capable. She doesn't blink. And now I am. He stares at them. For a second, it looks like he might yell, might stay and fight. But instead, he turns and walks out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the china in the cabinet. They don't speak for a long time after he leaves. That night, Lila finds another box in Gregory's closet. They hadn't searched it before. It had been sealed and marked archived. Inside, documents, photographs, old letters bundled in twine. She flips through them slowly until one envelope falls loose. It isn't addressed to her or Tyler, or even Deborah. The handwriting is unmistakably Gregory's. She opens it. The letter inside is incomplete. Just a few lines, but enough. I never meant to abandon what we had. The account is still under the name we agreed on. If anything happens, use the routing code from the Virginia bank file. She doesn't know. Lila reads it once, then again. She looks up. There was someone else. Her mother's eyes widen. Lila hands her the letter. It doesn't say the name, but the implication is there, and so is the betrayal. They sit in silence again, not from shock, but exhaustion. Still, something new flickers between them. Not just pain, but clarity. The conference room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of paper. I sat across from the family mediator, Harlan beside me, a stack of files and printed screenshots laid neatly between us. My palms were dry, my voice steady. I've documented everything, I began, not waiting for permission. Every instance, every word. The mediator, a composed woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a clinical tone, nodded as she flipped through the first few pages. Harlan leaned forward. This is not a case of bitterness or misunderstanding, it's about patterns. Margot has gathered texts, hidden camera evidence, corroborating child statements, and years of behavioral observation. She's not speculating, she's witnessing. The mediator tapped a highlighted paragraph with her pen. The children, are they aware this is happening? They're not just aware, I said. They're living in it. 2 days later, the interviews began. Maisie went in first, her pink sneakers swinging from the edge of the couch in the children's interview room. I wasn't allowed to sit with her, but I watched from the small observation window, heart in my throat. She clutched the corner of a drawing as the therapist gently asked about her home life. "My mommy gets loud a lot," she said softly. "Sometimes Declan hides in the closet." The therapist asked more questions, guiding, not leading. "She says Grandma makes things harder, but I like Grandma." Declan's session was shorter, more to the point. When asked how he feels when he's home with his parents, he shrugged. "Maisie cries a lot." "What about you?" "I don't cry. I just pretend I'm not there." "And when you're with your grandmother?" "She listens." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and reread every word of my journal. By morning, Harlan had filed the emergency petition for temporary guardianship. The court date was set for a week later. It rained that morning, hard. I wore a navy blazer and flats. Harlan drove. In the passenger seat, I clutched my file folder like a shield. The courthouse was quiet, clinical. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Caleb and Ainsley stood across the waiting area, both dressed in black. Caleb wouldn't meet my eyes. Ainsley wore red lipstick like armor. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thin. The judge, an older man with wireframe glasses and a measured demeanor, listened as both attorneys laid out their sides. Harlan spoke first. He presented the journal, the texts, the camera footage timestamps. He laid out a printed transcript of the group chat, lines of Ainsley's laughter shared with her friends at my expense. "She's folding laundry again, might as well charge her rent." "Babysitter Margot strikes again. At least she's useful for once." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Harlan read the messages aloud. Ainsley shifted in her seat, arms crossed tightly. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Then came the audio clips. Declan whispering, "She yells when Dad isn't home." Maisie softly saying, "She says not to tell Grandma stuff because she'll cry." Silence. Caleb was called to the stand. His voice cracked as he tried to defend Ainsley. "She's strict, not abusive." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Reynolds, the term strict loses merit when fear is involved. Did you know about the cameras?" "No," Caleb admitted, staring down at his lap. "And the chat?" His lips pressed together. "I didn't know, but I should have." Harlan handed over the group chat's timeline. "He was added to the chat. He received every message." Caleb's face crumbled. "I didn't read them," he said, almost inaudibly. "I ignored it." "And by ignoring it," Harlan said gently, "you allowed it." The judge nodded slowly. "That will be noted." Ainsley took the stand last. She was poised, cold, smiling too tightly. "Do you believe Margot is a danger to your children?" "She's emotionally unstable, obsessive." The judge held up a highlighted message from her group chat. "Maybe I'll set a trap, move the mugs again and watch her freak out." "Explain this," he said. Ainsley blinked. "It was a joke." "Your jokes," he replied, "come at the expense of a woman who helped raise your children. They aren't funny, they're disturbing." She opened her mouth to retort, then stopped. The courtroom was still. Caleb wouldn't meet her eyes. The judge folded his hands. "I've reviewed the evidence, heard the testimonies, and evaluated the risk factors. Effective immediately, Margot Reynolds is granted temporary guardianship of Maisie and Declan Reynolds. Visitation from the biological parents is to be supervised pending further evaluation." Ainsley gasped. "You can't be serious." The judge remained impassive. "I am." She stood up sharply. "You're all falling for her victim act. She's manipulative. She's always wanted to take control." Caleb tried to touch her arm. "Ainsley!" She jerked away. "Don't touch me." The bailiff stepped forward. The judge gave a quiet signal. Court was dismissed. I sat there, stunned, watching Ainsley storm from the room. Caleb lingered, then walked past me. He paused, just briefly. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "You didn't mean for anything," I said. "That's the problem." He nodded, then left. Outside, the rain had stopped. I stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, the folder still clutched in my hand, the clouds parting just enough for light to break through. I wasn't vindicated. Not fully. The road ahead would be long, but I was no longer voiceless. And the truth, finally, had a name. The judge's ruling had been final. Temporary custody to me, effective immediately. Ainsley was ordered to begin individual counseling and parenting classes within 30 days. Caleb was granted twice-weekly supervised visitation. There were no goodbyes that day, only a lingering tension in the courthouse hallway and the sound of Declan clutching my hand a little tighter. The children moved in that same evening. I'd prepared their rooms quietly, unsure whether hope was a luxury I could afford. Maisie's space had pale blue sheets and a new bookshelf I found at a second-hand store. Declan's room was filled with old Legos Arthur had kept in the garage, cleaned and sorted in neat bins. They didn't need time to adjust. They arrived with backpacks, quiet but calm, and walked through the front door like they were stepping out of the storm and into dry clothes. That night, after a quiet dinner, we curled up on the living room couch. Maisie rested against my shoulder, thumb in her mouth, hair still damp from her bath. Declan sat on the floor with a sketch pad on his knees. "Grandma," he said after a long silence, "it feels like we can breathe here." The words hit like sunlight through storm clouds. I didn't cry, not right then, but something inside me softened so completely I felt my own breath slow. The next morning, I made pancakes. Real ones, with butter and maple syrup, not the sugar-free, gluten-free substitutes Ainsley used. Maisie clapped her hands. Declan had seconds. We laughed. We spilled milk. We stayed in pajamas until noon. And just like that, the house began to change. The walls, once covered in antique plates and dried floral wreaths, were slowly overtaken by drawings and crayon murals. Maisie taped up her family portraits without asking. Declan created a sign for the bathroom that read, "Private, Dragons Only" in block letters. I left it up. The hallway that used to smell of lavender polish now smelled of Play-Doh and peanut butter. The couch had cookie crumbs. The kitchen had smudges on the fridge. My pristine sanctuary had finally become a home. At night, while they slept, I sat in the sunroom with my journal and finally did more than record pain. I wrote stories, little vignettes, moments from childhood, imaginings of who I might have been if I'd found my voice sooner. There was something liberating in writing without an audience, without permission. Then I found the flyer. It was tucked between gas bills and coupons in the mail. Writing from the Bones, a community memoir course for women reclaiming their voice. I called the same day and signed up. Every Wednesday evening, I sat in a circle of women who were strangers at first, then not. We shared pages. We cried over passages. We learned the power of revising not just words, but the meaning beneath them. I read aloud from my journal for the first time. I was not just a babysitter. I was the one who knew which mug Caleb drank from when he was sick, which lullaby Declan needed to hear twice, how Maisie hated tags on her shirts. I was the one who stayed. They applauded, not with pity, but with knowing. At home, Maisie took to reading too. She curled beside me at the kitchen table each afternoon, stumbling through pages of picture books while sunlight spilled across the worn wood. I helped her sound out the words. She asked questions. We underlined our favorites. "I want to write stories like you," she said one day. I kissed her forehead. "You already do. You just use pictures instead of paragraphs." Declan found comfort in the garden. He asked about the herbs, the soil. We planted basil and thyme together. I let him name the plants. He chose names like Captain Mint and Queen Rosemary. I didn't correct him. The house no longer echoed with waiting. It pulsed with life. Then, one evening, the phone rang. It was Joanne. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Margot." I hadn't spoken to her since the day she told me I was overreacting. I waited. "I was wrong," she said, barely audible. "I was so wrong." I said nothing. I saw the chat transcripts Caleb showed me. And Ainsley, she's done the same to me in smaller ways. For years, my breath caught. She told me I was a burden, said I wasn't needed anymore, said I should stop trying to parent my niece's kids like they were mine, made fun of my clothes, my weight, and I thought, maybe I deserved it. She broke down then. Not loud, not messy, just broken. "I don't want to stay in that house anymore," she whispered. "Can I come stay with you for a while?" I looked around the room, at Maisie drawing at the coffee table, at Declan petting the dog, at the storybook open beside my notebook. "Yes," I said. "Come home." The letter began with his name. Arthur. I should have written this years ago. I sat at the desk in the sunroom, the one that overlooked the lilac bushes we planted together in our second spring in the house. The late afternoon light streaked across the page as I wrote, not just to remember, but to release. You always saw what I couldn't name. You warned me in ways I wasn't ready to hear. You tried to give me the courage I hadn't yet earned. I want you to know, I'm listening now." The letter became a voiceover in my mind, the cadence of truth long overdue. I used to think silence was my duty. That being agreeable made me worthy. That strength meant swallowing pain and smiling through the burn. I thought if I stayed small enough, they'd have no reason to hurt me. I didn't know that staying small gave them permission to forget I was even there. I paused to wipe a tear from the edge of the paper before it smudged the ink. "You asked me once not to shrink. I didn't listen then, but I hear you now, and I'm standing." I folded the letter neatly and tucked it inside the back of my new manuscript. The title, handwritten across the top of the first page, read, "Invisible Until I Spoke." It wasn't a memoir for the world, not yet. It was for me. For Maisie, when she grew old enough to ask questions. For Declan, when he looked back and wondered how his childhood was salvaged. For Caleb, if he ever found the courage to face the things he couldn't bear to see. I wrote in the early mornings before the children stirred, when the world was quiet and honest. Some days I chronicled the humiliations, sharpened words, passive dismissals, the ache of being erased. Other days I wrote about the moments that saved me, Maisie's drawings, Declan's quiet resilience, the post-it notes that slowly built a new truth. The manuscript grew quickly, not because the story was easy, but because I'd carried it for decades. All I had to do now was let it breathe. It had been nearly 2 months since the court ruling when Caleb's letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, addressed in his slanted handwriting. I held it for a moment before opening it. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that I read your journal. Not the whole thing. Just what you left open on the table the day I came for the kids' bags. It made me realize how much I didn't see, or refused to see. I let Ainsley's version of truth become mine, and I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, for what I didn't do, for every time I looked away, for every time I didn't speak when I should have. For the fact that my children learned more about kindness from you than they ever did from us. I'm in counseling now. I'm trying to understand why I stayed quiet. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want to earn back what I broke. If you ever decide to speak to me again, I'll be here." There was no return address, but I didn't need one. I placed the letter beside the manuscript and closed the cover gently. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of a shaded cemetery plot in Pennsylvania. My mother's grave was simple, just her name and dates. No epigraph, no sentiment. I hadn't visited in years. I carried a single white rose and a folded piece of my manuscript, the opening page, the letter to Arthur. I knelt beside her headstone, resting the rose at its base. "I don't know if you ever loved me the way I needed," I said aloud, "but I've stopped waiting for that answer." The breeze stirred. "I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I need to let it go." I placed the folded page under the rose and stood. I didn't linger. I didn't cry. I walked away without turning back. The next day, Harlan called. "There's a community event happening next month," he said. "A forum on covert emotional abuse and family silence. They're asking survivors to speak. I thought of you." My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a speaker. I was a listener, a watcher, a writer. But the manuscript sat on the table beside me, waiting to be more than a private confession. "I'll do it," I said. The forum was held in a modest auditorium at the local library. The chairs were folding. The microphone squeaked once before settling. There were about 40 people, women with lined faces, young men with closed-off eyes, a few teenagers scribbling notes. I stepped onto the stage and unfolded my paper. I was a mother, a wife, a grandmother, and for a long time, I was invisible. I paused, took a breath. I believed being agreeable made me valuable. I let kindness be my cage. I was taught silence as survival, and I passed it on without knowing. Heads nodded. A woman in the back dabbed at her eyes. But then my granddaughter wrote me a note that said, "Please don't leave me." And I realized I wasn't invisible. I was their last hope. I read excerpts from my manuscript. I shared the post-it notes. I told them how standing for the backyard smelled of fresh-cut grass and grilled peaches. String lights crisscrossed above, glowing gently against the twilight sky. A small group of neighbors sat at the long table draped in a linen cloth, laughter soft and genuine as paper lanterns floated in the warm June air. Margot stood near the garden beds, trowel abandoned on the soil, her hands speckled with ink from a morning spent editing. Maisie danced barefoot across the stone path, spinning with Declan to music humming from the porch radio. Joanne carried a tray of lemonade to the table, her eyes brighter than they'd been in years. Even Caleb was there. He sat quietly at the edge of the group, not commanding attention, not trying to disappear. He looked older, just slightly, not from age, but from awareness. And when he caught Margot's glance across the yard, he nodded. Small, sincere. The space between them had not closed completely, but it no longer felt like a canyon. Margot turned back to the grill, flipping corn and brushing it with herb butter that Declan had mixed himself. She wore an apron with little handprints painted on the pockets. Maisie's idea. Her journal sat open on the patio table beside her, its corners curled from sun. Laughter erupted from the kids near the garden, where they'd invented a game involving chalk, worms, and a makeshift dragon cave built from overturned planners. No one told them to quiet down. No one hushed their joy. Inside, the living room had been transformed since the day the children arrived. The mantel, once lined with porcelain and muted tones, now held scribbled pictures, index cards with new vocabulary words, and a painted woodblock that read, "Home is who listens." The coffee table bore traces of marker and glitter glue. The walls no longer whispered silence. They buzzed with life. As dusk deepened, guests began drifting home. Joanne hugged Margot tight, her voice low. "Thank you. For everything. For not turning me away." "You turned back on your own," Margot replied. "That's all that matters." Caleb approached slowly, hands in his pockets. Maisie clung to his leg briefly before darting off again. "I liked tonight," he said. Margot didn't offer him absolution. She simply nodded. "It was good. I'm still working on everything." "I know." He glanced toward the table where her journal lay open, then back to her. "Can I read it? Someday?" Her voice was quiet, but certain. "If you're ready to hear all of it." He nodded once, turned, and walked toward Declan, who handed him a plastic sword and declared him Knight of the Back Fence. Margot chuckled, shaking her head, wiping ink from her fingers on a dish rag. She sat on the edge of the porch steps as the last guests left. The breeze carried traces of honeysuckle and distant laughter. Maisie climbed into her lap without a word, curling close. Declan dropped beside them and leaned into her arm. They sat like that for a while, watching stars slowly puncture the darkening sky. And in the quiet, Margot's voice emerged, not aloud, but within, strong and clear. "Margot, I used to think family was a bloodline, something unbreakable, something owed. But I've learned that family isn't inherited. It's chosen. Sometimes it's who stays when everything else crumbles. Sometimes it's who fights for you when no one else will. And sometimes it's who you fight to become, for them." A car passed slowly on the distant road, its headlights casting gentle halos through the tree line. Sometimes family is what you fight for, not who you're born to. The back door creaked open behind her, Joanne calling softly, "Tea's ready if you want." Margot smiled. "Be there in a minute." She stood, lifting Maisie gently, who giggled and ran ahead. Declan followed, waving goodnight to the fireflies. Margot paused just inside the door, glancing once more at the backyard, the lights, the laughter that lingered in the grass, the quiet grace of a life reclaimed. She walked to the journal on the table. She ran her hand along its spine. Then she closed it softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not just here to babysit anymore." And for the first time in years, she meant every word. If this story cracked something open in you, you're not alone. Every silent room, every unspoken truth, it's time we name them. Stick with us for more real stories where strength wears wrinkles and justice whispers before it roars. Because sometimes the loudest revolutions begin with a woman finally saying, "Enough."